Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Make You Known podcast. Today our guest is the founding director of a film company who has worked alongside the likes of Matt Damon, Liam Neeson, Ronan Keating and more, as well as doing projects for organisations such as National Geographic, World Vision, Compassion and more. The company is Prospect Arts. You can find them at prospectarts.com and on Instagram at Prospect Arts, which is all one word. The founding director is sat right here. It's Mr. Tim Neeves. Tim, welcome along.
Thank you for having me.
So, before we dive into any of our other questions, I want to learn a little bit more about you and your story. Like, how does someone go from being a music graduate to having a documentary on Netflix, which you do have, right?
That is true, yeah. First of all, it's been a long journey. It certainly didn't happen overnight. So my background is really all in music, although I grew up with photography and filmmaking because my dad, who ran an agency when I was a youngster, he would always bring home his cameras and old film cameras for me to play with. So it was always there as a bit of a sort of a hobby. In fact, he would found some old VHS cassettes a few months ago from my old primary school where I was there holding the camera, interviewing my peers and doing like the Summer Fate kind of video, which is. It's kind of funny because even then, it was definitely something I enjoyed, but never thought that it would be something that I'd pursue. And because music was everything to me. So I did my undergrad, which I finished in like 2000, decided to go and get a job in an office and realised after about 3 months that an office job was not for me. Went back to university, did a postgrad in composition, so kind of like orchestral, sort of film, music-y type stuff. And then, I guess coming towards the end of that, I probably wondered what I would do for work and as a career. And I think probably in the last kind of few years, I think I've realised that I always thought I'd probably end up taking over my dad's company. But then when I was a teenager, he sort of gave that up. And he sort of gave it away effectively. So that was obviously not going to happen. But when he was working for an organisation called Compassion International at the time, so he was establishing compassion around the world. So he started it in the UK, in Germany, Italy, and a few other places. And towards the end of my postgrad composition course, he took me on a trip to Uganda, really just to show me the work that he'd been kind of doing for most of my childhood. So even when he was running his agency, he was doing a lot of films and kind of marketing campaigns for different organisations. So I remember when I was probably, 5 years old or 6 years old, him coming back from Ethiopia after one of the big famines and showing rushes from the film that he was making. And I'd go up to the edit suite in Soho and just watch what was going on. And I guess I was soaking it all in, but not really thinking about that as a career. And so I went on this trip to Uganda and had the most incredible experience. I took a video camera with me because it was a bit of a hobby, and I shadowed the filmmaker who was from Colorado. Just kind of watched what he did. Again, not thinking this was anything I wanted to do, but just because I was just interested. And it was quite an incredible experience. And towards the end of that trip was my kind of moment, which I think obviously some people have, maybe some people don't have, but it was like that kind of pinnacle moment where I just realised I needed to do something about what I was seeing. And it was when I'd met this boy who was living with his grandmother. His whole family had died from HIV/AIDS. Like the whole community was really destroyed by the virus. And he was given about 3 or 4 months to live. This kind of beautiful young boy, but like a skeleton. I mean, he was so poorly. And I think it was in that moment that I knew I needed to do something. But again, I didn't know what. And I thought, I'll go and I'm going to write music and change the world writing music. And so actually when we came home, the first thing I did was write a piece of music and dedicated it to that boy. So I named it after him, and it's kind of like a quite dissonant starting kind of point to this piece of music, and then it kind of gets to the point where he dies, and then it ends up in heaven, with his heavenly Father, and it's kind of much more kind of pure and peaceful. So that was, I think, was part of my contribution, and I think I graduated, and at that point, Compassion UK had probably been running for maybe a year or so. And the executive director said, "Oh, what? I know you've got nothing better to do. Why don't you edit some of the content that you were part of filming in Uganda?" So the cameraman from the US sent over the rushes, and I basically cut my teeth on Final Cut. I think it must have been the first version of Final Cut Pro, which I bought as a student. So I'd kind of whilst I was at university, I was learning a little bit. And I still think to this day it's probably one of the best films I've ever made, probably because I spent ages on it. And it was a film called One at a Time, and it's about this girl called Jackie that my dad had filmed for the previous 15 years, I think. He'd met her, she was living in a small fishing village called Garber on the shores of Lake Victoria, and I can't, because so long ago now, I can't remember the full story, but I'm pretty sure her dad was not around. She was one of several children and desperately poor. And so my dad filmed with a team this story of this girl before being registered in a compassion project. And so they got that, and then they went along about 5 years later, got an update, and then another 5 years. And then this was the 15-year mark or so when she'd graduated from the program and had got accepted into the university. So she was the first, I think she must have been the first girl in that community that had gone to university. So it's an amazing story. So I kind of edited this, probably 18-minute epic. It felt like an epic because it took me so long. And I think that was the beginning of my journey.
So then in terms of getting a documentary on Netflix, is that the case? And working for clients of, really high caliber and all that, is that just a case of you did what you did well, kept your standards high, and eventually one thing sort of leads to another in a kind of organic way, or was there more of a specific process?
Yeah. So I think you're right. It's been about executing our work well, but almost more, I think in many ways, more importantly, I think is the people that I've been privileged to work with, so the team of people that I've employed, and the heart that we put into the work, whether it is a charity gig, like the work we do with Compassion, World Vision, Food for the Hungry and others, or whether it is a corporate client, like we've done stuff with Chibo and loads of different people over the years. And so I think it's the relational way we go about our work. Because you can be a great filmmaker, with a beautiful eye for capturing great images, but if you're a bit of a pain in the bum to work with, you're not going to get referrals, and you're certainly not going to get ongoing work. And I think the other thing that I remember someone saying to me early on in kind of my career was, you're only as good as your last job, which is always a good thing to remember, because even when you've got great relationships, if you don't deliver, then you have to have a really, really great relationship to kind of let you over that and to give you another chance. So I think that's the thing, is it's just been tenacity, and it's been nurturing really solid relationships. And I think there has been I think the art of storytelling is something that I do believe that we have a gifting in. I believe I have a gifting in, certainly, and I'm a horrible self-promoter. I don't like kind of talking in those kind of terms, but I do think that there's something that happens when you are, behind the camera for me, which is my comfortable position. This is not very comfortable for me because I much prefer sitting over there behind the camera asking questions. But I think, being able to bring out people's stories, and again, that for me, I do have a particular passion for justice issues. So that's why we love working with Compassion and these others. But I also just really love the whole art of storytelling. So one of the big projects we did 2 or 3 years ago was with the US Olympics, which was a 2-part TV show for NBC. And it was called the Next Olympic Hopeful. So we were following like 90 young athletes who were competing for a spot on Team USA. In fact, there were, I think, like 8 different spots that I did, like boxing and bobsleigh and skeleton and a few others. And that was, it was a really fun project. I mean, it was really hard. That was a big learning curve for me, working with big kind of NBC execs who want they want their money's worth from you, and they're used to working on very, very tight timelines. And we had a big crew. To be honest, I can't even remember how many. There must have been like 30 or so people on the team, multiple camera units going out. But it was wonderful though, because we were capturing great stories of these youngsters, some of whom had come out of difficult experiences, or just some of them were just like super talented, and it was just really interesting just to get behind their childhood and hearing about what they've gone through and why they're passionate about being an athlete. And so it was a kind of a fun project to work on, and I think that again it's that relational thing which I think is really important. And not, again, you could be a great cameraman and you could be a good director in terms of setting up the shots, but you might not be great at pulling out the story and building that relationship. And we found over the years, I mean, it's quite extraordinary how people open up on camera. I don't know whether you've had this experience, but where you find yourself, and it's particularly in the case of some of the non-profit work that we do, it's amazing how open people can be. And again, I think that it's the relational approach, which I guess is why we have been rehired for over the years. So 19 years on, we're still doing work with Compassion. We love them dearly, a great organisation. We've been working with World Vision now for probably 8 or 9 years, and Food for the Hungry, we're based out in Phoenix for about 7 years now. And I think it's the way that we can operate on the field with cultural sensitivity, the fact that we're passionate about the work, and we can pull in good stories. And I think that then is led on to working with Nat Geo and ultimately onto these other bigger projects, which is hugely exciting.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting, I think, because the lesson I'm getting there is that being able to produce a technically good shot and all that isn't the whole picture. Like there's, as you're saying, that kind of an eye for the story and all that kind of thing is all part of that package. And and so we are going to talk about kind of a little bit about creative entrepreneurship and some stuff to do with that in a kind of Christian world as well. But just off the back of what you're saying about doing all this stuff with World Vision or Compassion and this kind of humanitarian and the origins of your desires to do this stuff, have you felt like you have been able to make a difference through what you do? Because this is one of these things I often think about, is how can I do what I do and make a difference and also make a living? That feels like quite a tension.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I can say 100% that the work that I've been able to do over the last 19, almost 20 years has made a difference. And I think that's the thing. My wife often says to me, not everything that glitters is gold, which I think is a really great thing to remember. Like, it's easy to look, and my dad always says to me, I've got these people who give me advice, when you're going through the turmoil like you've been through, we've all been through last year with this pandemic, it's very easy to look at other people and think, oh, gosh, look what they're doing, isn't it amazing? And I remember this like right from the early days that there was this wonderful event that we used to go to in London called Artisan, who's run by a dear friend of ours, Steve Cole, and it pulled together musicians, artists, filmmakers, all involved in, basically Christians involved in the creative arts industries, for like a monthly prayer gathering. And I used to feel so insecure going to this, because you'd be like, oh, Dave, come up to the front, let's get a prayer around Dave. This is like made up. But it'd be some Dave who'd be like, oh, I've just been promoted to the head of A&R for Island Records, and it's a hugely privileged to do this job, and blah 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 blah. And then there'd be someone else like Sarah, who's just she's just been taken on as lead photographer for Vogue. And there's always amazing people, and it was incredible, this kind of stuff they're doing. But it's very easy to kind of look at that and think, wow, it's glittery, it's all gold, and I'm sure there is a lot of gold in there. But then I think to look at a lot of the stuff that I think I've done over that, particularly in those early years, which isn't very glittery. Doing a 3-minute promo for a charity is not doing a TV program for Channel 4. But having said that, the actual process for capturing that content has actually been incredibly exciting and enjoyable and fulfilling, because the kind of people that we get to meet and the people we get to work with are just some of the best people in the world. But the difference that we're making is tangible. So, oh gosh, one of the films we did for Compassion Netherlands was probably, I don't know, 15 years ago. It seems like a long time ago. It probably wasn't that long ago, maybe 10 years. Was a simple little film, probably 5 minutes, and tens of thousands of children have been lifted out of poverty as a result of that one little film that didn't cost very much to make. And that kind of fills me with great kind of, I don't know what the adjective is. You can help me out there.
Yeah.
It's just...
I know what you mean. It's joy, satisfaction, fulfillment.
But I think that, in a sense, to encourage people who might be listening and thinking, well, gosh, you've got a Netflix documentary, and we're working on another at the moment, trying to finish off an opioid film. And it sounds amazing, and it is amazing, and I feel really privileged to do that. But I think no matter what kind of projects you're doing, if you're working with passion and using your gifts to the best of your abilities, you can find fulfillment in all of that. And whether that's doing like a little 1 minute or 2 minute promo for like a local organisation, or for a school, or for a church, or whatever. So yeah.
But can you make a living out of that, or is it a case of you have to balance it with the other kind of corporate jobs in order to pay the bills? Or
you can make a living out of it, yeah, but it does, the corporate work does help. And I think, to be honest, we've done well over the years, really out of the volume of the work that we've done, as well. So just looking at it from a purely business point of view, the profit margins on the kind of the non-profit sector and certainly the church sector are a lot lower than obviously in the corporate sector. So you either have to work, every hour of the day and night, pretty much, to kind of be working on all these non-profit projects, or you balance it out, which is what we've done over the years as best as we can, with the corporate work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes total sense, I guess. It's that sort of balancing act that's going on, and and it's all also organic, isn't it? In terms of, I don't know if you find this, but sometimes no one wants you, and suddenly everyone wants you at once to do something, and you just kind of rolling with it a little bit.
Yeah, the classic feast or famine.
Yes, exactly. So we do want to talk a little bit about just like running a business as a Christian, because this is something I don't run a business, I'm self-employed, but you know what I mean. I guess the whole kind of world in which we are and the way it operates, it feels like often when you have a conscience, you sort of want to keep doing things cheaper, or you want to give stuff because you hate charging people or whatever. But you need to make a living. And then conversely, it seems like people who are a bit more ruthless and cutthroat are the ones who sort of often actually do make a living and all the rest of it. So how do we navigate this kind of world, you know, and the business world as Christians? Because I don't know what you think, but I sort of don't think it's a case of compartmentalising your life and going, well, on a Sunday I'm a Christian and during the week I'm just going to be a ruthless businessman.
It's hard. I mean, I think, like you, I think my least favourite thing is doing a quote. If you counted up the hours that I pour over a quote, it's ridiculous. I'm like, can we, you know, sure there are ways we can cut off here and there. Right? And that's where, you know, I feel in some ways I've probably failed as a businessman, and I think I could have made an awful lot more money had I kind of been more ruthless. But again, that's not, I never set out really to be in business, and I think that's I kind of fell into it. It's a bit odd to kind of put it that way. But it is a balance. It's a balancing act of how to get, you know, that your pricing structure's right. And, you know, one of the pieces of advice I was given, I think probably by my dad when I was starting out, is either do something, but this is particularly within the kind of the charity and church sector, either do something for free, not at all, or for a relatively good amount. And I think that's been something I've tried to stick to. So we've done a lot of kind of pro bono projects over the years, and then there'll be some people where we'll put a quote together and they'll come back and they'll say, can you do it for less? And we have to say no, because, you know, whether it's a £1,000 or $1,000 job, whatever, for a non-profit or for a church, for them that is going to be a lot of money, and for us it might not be a lot of money, but, you know, they are going to want their pound of flesh for it. So it's better to do it for free, or say, well, actually, this is what it costs, and if you can't do it, then I'm really sorry, we can't do this one. And that's been something I've tried. So we've done a lot of pro bono stuff, and then we have done a few jobs where I haven't stuck to that, and they've almost always come to bite us on the bum because, you know, you end up working crazy hours for next to nothing, and then feeling a little bit frustrated because the person doesn't recognise that they're actually getting a really, really great deal, or really, you know, it's effectively a kind of a pro bono job, but they don't recognise it because they still think, oh, we're paying you £300. You're like, well, it's not really paying anything. It's costing me.
Yes.
So that's a good piece of advice for people. You know, free, good value, or not at all.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And reminds me of a friend of mine who I do some work for once said to me, I don't want you to give me like mates rates, because he says at a subconscious level, if you're charging less, that you're going to put less into it because your heart's less in it. So I want to pay the full price and kind of get the best out of you, which I kind of think is true, actually. And I hadn't really thought about it that way. Maybe you disagree, but
I disagree. I mean, I disagree with that for me, just because I know that, you know, we have I have a reputation. So if I put out something that looks not very good, then that goes around. And so, yeah, that's the thing, is if you're doing something for free or for not a lot, you still end up putting in the hours because you're like, oh, I just want it to be good. And that's just because I'm I'm a perfectionist. I go through edits, and that's, I like things to be a certain way. So even if it's a little job, I'll still put in more time just to make sure that the audio cuts are in the right place. You know, they're nicely transitioned, and all of that kind of stuff takes time. It doesn't matter if I'm not being paid to do it. I'll still do it because it's got my name on it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. You mentioned some people they've said, can we do it for lower? And you've had to say no. Out of interest, have those people generally then gone, oh, okay, and done the job anyway? Or have they gone, oh, okay, and left it? Like, have you ever sort of regretted that? Or
I have regretted it a few times, just when you know, and it's again that it's living in that balance of, you know, where is the next job coming? You know, I think a lot of people can look at a business like ours and think, oh, yeah, they've got it all okay because, you know, they've got employees, they've got kit and a studio and everything. But I still have that freelancer mentality because if I don't go out and find work, I don't get paid, and nor do my staff get paid, and nor does the rent and electricity and the coffee machine. So it is, you know, I still feel the pinch when you say no to a job. And there definitely have been times when people have come back and said, "Oh, okay," and it's never been like, I don't think it's ever been like there and then, fine, we'll pay for it. It's often been, you know, a few months down the line where they're like, "Oh, we've managed to find some extra budget in our pot, or we went out to another investor and managed to find a little bit of extra. We'd really like to do it because we know you'll put in the kind of work."
Yeah, okay. So, on a slightly different note, our culture can be a little bit obsessed, can't it, around career and status and things that are very much of our identity is often derived from what we do for a living, rightly or wrongly. That's often the way we operate. The first thing we do when we meet someone is we ask, "Oh, what do you do?" And
yeah,
I guess it's what we spend most of our life doing. So, how do you manage that? Because you're a father, right? You've got children, and how your business, I can imagine, is something that can become like almost, even though it's a business, also like a passion project. And you kind of, how do you not get run away with it and get your whole identity and your ego and everything tied into that, and keep it as how do you step back from that?
I would say not very well, to be honest. And that's just me being real. I mean, running a business, and particularly the kind of business that we do, you know, which is, there's a lot of, I would like to say, world-changing kind of content. So, I mean, you look at Brave Blue World that we finished right heading into the pandemic, which is now on Netflix. Yeah, that is a film that's really important. And those projects, they always take up more time, and it's not just because they are big projects, but it's because they're passion projects, as you say. So, you know, I often wake up in the morning, I'm like, I wonder if I could do that to that project, or I've currently got 4 big projects on the go, kind of in pre-production, and my brain is always whirring, but it's because I love what I do. And then it is that difficult balance of managing family and which obviously has to come first. And I'll be honest to say that I don't always do brilliantly well at that, and I do have to constantly work at not staying here in the office till 7 o'clock, but actually leaving as early as I can, so I can get back and do bedtime with the children, because I know these years where I'm not going to get back. But I think the whole identity in work is that is a big one, particularly for Christians, because obviously we're supposed to have our identity not in our work but in Jesus. But again, and that's something that I have struggled with a lot over the years, and that's again where my wife says not everything that glitters is gold. My dad says you just mustn't look sideways, just keep looking forwards, because it's easy to compare yourself with others. I mean, comparison is the thief of joy, exactly. And I found that over the years, and so I do try and make a conscious effort to not put my identity in this. And I actually do think the biggest test of that has been this last year and a half, or however long it's been, since March 2020 with the pandemic, where all of a sudden everything's gets stripped away, or certainly for us it did. For the previous 17, 18 years, I was flying probably 100,000 miles at least every year to different places around the globe, I've not been on an aeroplane since January 2020, and we're now in June 2021, and that's crazy for me. And I think, the instability of work on a whole other level. Yes, I've had times over the years where we've had that kind of feast and famine, but this last 18 months has been like what is around the corner? I don't know. So I do feel like this last period has been a good opportunity to find where my identity is, and making sure that it isn't in my work. And actually, I can honestly say, and this is maybe just from where we've been, that all of this could be stripped away, and what I do have is, I do have my faith and I have my family, and those, I know that, wherever I end up, I will find joy, in maintaining that relationship. And that's the thing, again, I guess the benefit of the kind of work that we've got to do over the years. So you spend time I remember in Ethiopia when we were filming this big feature project called 58, which is based on Isaiah 58, calling on those who profess a faith to reevaluate their life and think, what am I actually giving my life to? And so, you got the prophet Isaiah saying, you bow down like a reed and you worship me, but at the same time you're oppressing the workers. And I think that's something that often businessmen do. It's like on a Sunday they're at church, praising the Lord and whatever, and then in their office at the weekday they are oppressing the workers. They're not paying them a fair wage. They're not treating them with respect, and they're kind of and that goes obviously way beyond that, which obviously in that Isaiah passage, and certainly where I've kind of journeyed over the years, is down to the way we live our lives in terms of the choices we make economically, and how we give, how we show acts of generosity. That anyway, so I'm going on a way big tangent there. But so we're filming in Ethiopia. This wonderful family, worker to the mum, abandoned by her husband, who's left her with all these children in the most dilapidated hut you've ever seen, and a community that literally had death on the face of everyone living there, because it hadn't rained for a couple of years properly. So there was this crazy drought. It was like dusty ground. They had like little shoots. It had rained, I think, a few days before we got there, so there were these little shoots that were coming up, but they immediately died because there's not enough groundwater. But this woman had, she just had joy, and I've seen that all over the world, where people who have very, very little end up finding joy. And you look at some of these, I think there's a guy called Tom Clancy, kind of based, The Wolf of Wall Street is based off, and had all the fame and fortune, and yet didn't have joy in his heart. And I think that's the thing, is you can always kind of try and go and try and get more and more and more, but the reality is the more you have, the more you want. So I guess that's kind of slightly around the houses way of me saying, I think having had those opportunities to meet people who have nothing and have joy, I know in this period of uncertainty that a lot of us are going through, that if we are able to kind of have our identity in Jesus, and having kind of wholesome kind of relationships with our community, so like our friends and obviously our in close family units, then you can get through anything.
Yeah, I love that, the Isaiah 58 thing, and it's such a beautiful chapter, and I think that it is worth going there, actually. I'm glad you mentioned it, because I think there's a lot of kind of comfort Christianity where we sort of expect that we can have the best of both worlds, that we can have a perfectly ordinary middle class life that's very comfortable, and where we're just pursuing kind of making everything like idealized living conditions for ourselves, and do this other thing, which I think we can, and that's not a hit. I'm not criticizing anyone who does, but because I guess it comes down to a heart matter at the end of the day, which I guess you can't see in someone else's heart. But I just think it's something to be wary of, isn't it? That we can just kind of live this comfortable life and go to church on Sunday and kind of just. I think there's something more. I think we're missing out almost. We're limiting ourselves in terms of what if we're just sowing to our immediate joy and our immediate just self-satisfaction, we won't reap that joy that you're talking about possibly.
Exactly. There was this amazing church that we filmed in a few years ago. I'd love to do something more with it because it's such a great story. But the church leader was brought in to close down the church because they'd been losing numbers, and the kind of denomination head were like, let's cut the losses there. So they sent this guy in to effectively just to wind it down and do it nicely. But the first message that he preached from the pulpit was this Isaiah 58. Is this not the fast that I've chosen to break the chains of injustice, to clothe the naked and feed the hungry? And when you do these things and all these wonderful promises, and it was like he said it was as preaching that message, it was like a light switch went on in the church, and they started this project called Common Ground, where every Friday night they'd have a homeless shelter, and these members of the community would come and sleep over. They'd provide them opportunity to wash and clean their clothes, and then they'd have this slap-up breakfast on the Saturday morning. Table settings with tablecloths. Like, they really treated them with dignity, and it was such a beautiful thing. They didn't like ram the gospel down their throat, which often happens in kind of church contexts. Yeah. It's like, you've got to get the gospel in there. When actually what they were doing is they were just loving them. They were literally being the hands and feet of Jesus, which I think that's the kind of evangelism that I want to stand up for. It's like, you can be builded by building community and walking alongside people. And so we gave these guys breakfast, and then they had place where they basically opened up basically like a food bank, and then a clothes bank, and they'd give them tokens, and someone from the church would walk around and they'd help them. And their church grew to from about 100 people to 2,000, I think. And they ran this project. I don't know. I've lost touch with them. I don't know whether they're still doing it. But every week they had to have something like 100 or so volunteers, 200 volunteers maybe. And I remember talking to the guy, saying, how this must be a crazy rota system. Like, how do you manage all this? He's like, oh no, we don't do a rota. People just show up to run it. And I think about that in the context of where we go to church. Trying to get people to do anything like pulling teeth. No offense, but the thing is, when you get people who are actually living out a faith that actually means something. And I think that's the problem. That often the global church gets it so wrong. I think that's where people come alive. And this, talking to some of the members in this community, they're like, we used to kind of go to church and it was like the thing that we did, but actually doing this gave us purpose. And this is what I want to live for. And I think that's, I guess at the end of that Isaiah 58 passage is what it means. It's like, the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. You'll be like a well-watered garden. And always, you'll be rebuilding the ancient walls that were once in ruins. And he's got those great promises. And you see that in the lives of people who actually get engaged in that, in those kind of areas of reaching out. And that doesn't have to be as extreme as running a homeless shelter in your community. But it could be as simple as going and visiting some old folk in an old people's home, or getting alongside someone in your place of work who's struggling with anxiety and depression, and just being an encouraging ear. You don't have to kind of be preaching the gospel at them. You can just be like, just being a friend, but actually active in that.
I love that story about the church, and I think it comes down to a kind of a conversation we were having yesterday around vision, which is your vision Like, are you just focused on what my next thing is for my career or whatever? Or, because when you live like that, you sometimes just miss all the stuff that's going on around on a daily basis, like under your nose, where you can be salt and light and feed into situations which you would just never. And in that respect, Corona's also been great for that in terms of just like noticing your neighbours. Like, I guess most of my life has just been going in and out of my house and flying, just rushing around everywhere. Now I'm like, oh yeah, there's people who live like near me who I could maybe engage with a little bit and talk to. Yeah. It's not rocket science. I haven't really done anything for them. I've just started talking to people. And anyway. So are there any resources you kind of go to, or any books you've read, or anything you've listened to, or whatever, that's helped you navigate this kind of world of running my business and doing it in a way in which I'm happy with and all the rest of it, and or is it, or not really?
To be honest, for me, the big thing has been having mentors who I can go to. So, I mean, there have been some books I've read, and some of them have been, okay. There's nothing I would say, oh yeah, you've got to read Good to Great. Such a great book. I mean, actually it's quite a good book. But for me, it's been more getting alongside people who could give you good advice, sound advice. So like my dad has been like a really great mentor for me over the years, still is. I've got another really close friend, Eric Sandor, who's a very successful businessman who has just been a great ear and encourager, champion for me, and someone who I can talk through stuff, and then he'll say, oh, you might want to think about this kind of structure, and then I'll go home and get on Google and be like, what's this mean? So I think there's been some of that. There is something that I have recently signed up for. It's mainly because I just find, particularly with the fact I've got 3 young kids and running a business which has kind of like the bread and butter work, but also the kind of the big, so these 4 big film projects I'm kind of trying to kick off at the moment. I don't have a lot of time to read books. Oh, I'm also doing an MBA, which is also kind of, which I think is probably, that's a great tool for trying to learn about business, because it covers all areas of accounting and marketing and economics and all that kind of stuff, which I probably should have done 20 years ago. I probably would have made more money, but there we go. But yeah, I think that this app called Blinkist, which I think looks quite interesting, because what they do is they distill loads of books, and there's they cover all areas of literature. I mean, I don't know whether they do literature so much as kind of business and psychology and various other things like that. And they basically distill them down to 15-minute.
Oh, great.
It's really good. So I literally signed up to that last week, and I've listened to a couple of books. One of them I'd actually read before, which was Good to Great, it was good.
Who's that by?
Oh gosh, don't ask me.
Okay. I guess if we just look it up on Amazon,
on Amazon, you'll find it. But yeah, and then there was another book which I can't remember what the title of it was called. But that's actually, it's quite a good place to go. It's quite expensive, but if you're time poor and you want to kind of just start soaking up a whole load of information, there's some great books on there that are broken down to 15-minute listens. Don't even have to read them, so you could be on your journey to work, and that's quite good.
That's really good. Yeah, that's helpful. Any lessons of leadership or that you've learned that maybe are applicable across the broad spectrum of life from your last 20 years running your business?
I've learned a lot in terms of managing people, and not all easy. I think this is where I think doing this MBA I think is going to be quite interesting, just to look at the way other people have done it over the years. But I mean I've always liked kind of training people up, and I think that in some ways is possibly been lessons I've learned that I would not do moving down the line is giving people too much freedom. So I think that's probably been one of my mistakes, is kind of because I so want people to succeed that I kind of I've often let people run a little bit too far before I realise, like, oh, come back a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that has possibly where we've seen some casualty in terms of our kind of regular work, is where I have taken my eye off the ball because I've been kind of flying off to the States. So our business is both here in the UK and in the US, and I'd often be travelling out to the US to go and have some meetings, and taking my eye off the ball here and not maybe having trusting others to you oversee that project and see it off to the end. And I think that is one of the things that I think I've probably given a little bit too much room for. But I think ultimately having said that, I think giving people room to grow and challenging them, I think has been a really beneficial thing for the employees that I've had, because they've grown quite quickly. They've had to, and also I think has been a beneficial thing for us as a business. Not sure whether that answers your question.
Yeah, I think so. It's that I mean, that kind of people skills management thing and all of that. I guess it's not something you can. Well, there probably are books that are helpful, but it's one of those things. I guess everyone's different, right? And the way you handle different characters are different.
I think one of the things that has been a challenge is like having a flat line structure. So I've almost always really had a flat line structure, so I don't treat anyone really any differently. So whether it's a junior who's coming in as like an intern or as a junior editor or something, I won't speak to them differently really than one of the team who's been with us for 10 years, because there's that kind of respect and wanting them to feel like part of the family, as it were. So I think, but again, that in some ways has engendered problems, because then they maybe don't see that there is actually, whilst it is a flatline structure, there is also an authority structure. Naturally, when you've got someone who has got the years of experience. So like Tom who works with us, who's brilliant shooter and great editor. He should be someone that a junior editor would look up to as like, I want to learn from you because you've got it going. But if when you have that flat line, like if I'm talking to that junior and kind of getting excited about feature film idea, they kind of maybe don't see that there is Tom is, or someone of the other members is actually should be looked up to and wanting to learn from. So
okay, so let's just hit a couple of quick fire questions before we wrap up. So let's start with gospel in 1 minute.
Jesus came to give us freedom. That's less than 1 minute. That's it.
Great. Let's see if
Jesus got his love.
Tweet sized, yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of tweet sized, could you, if you were to send one sort of tweet sized message out to a younger generation today, what would it say?
Oh, is this like a Jesus message or a well?
You can pick your audience, and you can do a different one to a different audience if you want to do more than one.
Okay. Well, I think for me, one of the big things is the environment. So, fight for the environment and fight for humanity. It probably covers both, really. It's a bit twee, to be honest. Tweets are really difficult because you actually really need to wordsmith them to not sound a complete idiot. But I think that's the thing. It's like, go for it. I'll stick with that.
It's a good option.
Yeah.
It's a good option. How do you cope with kind of discouragement, dark night of the soul? And as we're kind of on a business one, we can even lean that into when everything's going a bit ropey in the work world as well.
How do I cope with that?
Yeah.
For me, I find prayer is a really good thing. People from a non kind of church background might look at meditation, which in many ways is the same thing. So actually one of the things I've been doing this last year is trying every day to go for a walk and listen to Lectio 365, which is Pete Gregg's and the 24/7 prayer thing. It's absolutely brilliant. Love it. Little kind of probably 15-minute meditation. So I think that's the thing for me, being grounding.
Cool. Great. So any last thoughts, or do you want to tell us anything you're working on? Anything exciting coming up you want to share with us before we wrap up?
Oh, there are lots of exciting things I'm working on at the moment. I think I think our opioid film I feel very excited about. We are looking at updating it at the moment. So we filmed a revolutionary cure. Can't really call it a cure. I think it is. A device, non-invasive, non-pharmaceutical device to help people come out of drug addiction. Hugely exciting. It's going to radically change the face of drug treatment and rehab. If our government and the US government, the FDA, jump on board and actually recognise it. And this is the crazy thing, during this pandemic, we have all, I don't know where you are, I'm older than you, so I've had my AstraZeneca, but we've all been basically pumping our arms full of experimental drugs that have basically been rushed through in this last, year. And, this device that we filmed for our opioid film was developed probably in its early form 40 years ago by a Scottish doctor, Meg Patterson, and it's gentle electronic stimulation, so it doesn't puncture the skin. It's like a TENS machine, so they put little electrodes behind the mastic bone, sends gentle pulse stimulation, which helps the brain send natural pain relief to help you off your withdrawal symptoms. And then after about 5 or 6 days or so, your body recalibrates itself, your brain recalibrates itself, so you have no cravings. And this we filmed being used, like a new version of this device, in Kentucky 2.5 years ago, and these patients came clean, and it's amazing. And my mind was blown watching it. 15 minutes into wearing it, they're like, you could see them, calming down, becoming more lucid in their thoughts. And I think that's a hugely exciting story. So I'm hoping, if I can get a visa to get back out to the States, I think I have an appointment in March 2022, and I was hoping for one in about a week's time. So that's a bit of a problem. But I want to get an update, because those guys are still clean. So almost 3 years on, still clean. And one of them is working in the rehab facility, helping others as a peer mentor, coming off and as a counsellor. So that's an exciting project that I'd love to see, and I'd love to see out on a big streamer like Netflix. So hopeful.
So do you know when that might be out? Or
don't know. Probably maybe the autumn. Yeah.
Cool.
We do have a distributor, although I'm not sure how and when that's all working.
Okay, so, best of luck with that. And one last question before we wrap up. This is a very stereotypical cliche question. If you've got someone watching or listening who is starting out, they know they love their film, or it may be, even for argument's sake, something a bit like, it may be stills or it may be music, but let's maybe stick with film for now, because what's your key piece of advice to them? They're like, I love doing it, but how do I get my foot in the professional door, that it stops just being this hobby and it starts being something there?
I think a good step is finding someone who you can learn from, and then whether that's going and doing like an intern work experience, kind of apprenticeship, I think is a good starting point. Not being afraid to start at the bottom, and I think that's part of the challenge that I found over the years with I don't know what you call them now, whether it's the Gen Zs, who I think have that expectation to kind of walk in at the top because they've grown up with mummy and daddy providing them with everything, and not recognising that actually they need to be willing to go and make the cup of tea and be like, what else can I do? And being I think just thoughtful and proactive in their thinking and in going after work. It's not going to land on your plate. For some people it does, if you are very well connected, it can land on your lap. But I think it's being proactive and dogmatic and not giving up. And all of those things. Don't take no for an answer. Push on doors.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, don't take failure, as a big thing. Like, failure is such a great opportunity to learn. I mean, man, I've messed up so many times. I remember one of my first shoots where I got sun cream in my eye. This is when I went on this first job, unpaid, to Haiti. I remember walking down this slum and I had sunscreen in my eyes. You know what that's like, where you're sweating and it's all going everywhere and I couldn't really see. And I was using this camera that, nowadays would be considered as awful because you could barely see through the viewfinder anyway. It's this Canon XL1. And so I was like filming this guy walking through, and I got to the end of the day. I'm like, oh, some amazing stuff. I can't wait to review all of that. And I played back through the rushes, and somehow in the process of walking or running to the next area to capture him, I'd hit the record button. And then as I kind of pulled the camera up, framed it beautifully, hit record, hitting stop. So basically the whole day had or that whole section had filmed a whole load of me kind of running down this, slum community. So, you make mistakes and you learn from them. You shoot something and it's horribly overexposed, or the audio's peaking, or you ask a really dumb question. You're like, no. But it's a great opportunity to learn. And so I think that's the advice I'd give to people starting out is, don't give up, be passionate, and find people that you can learn from. And
Great. Tim, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And great success with everything. I hope it all goes well.
Thank you.
And see you again sometime. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope that was indeed helpful and stimulating to you. If it was, or if you've got further questions, feel free to drop a comment in the comment section if you're on YouTube, or if you are listening, you can get in touch with us. We're on Instagram at make_you_known. Until next time, take care.